You've probably seen Temu, the orange ads, the absurd prices. Shop like a billionaire. But very few people know the man behind it. Before Temu ever existed, he had already done something that once seemed almost impossible. He built a company that briefly overtook Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant, in market value. And he didn't do it by building a better Alibaba. He changed the way people came to shop in the first place. By the middle of the 2010s, Alibaba wasn't just China's biggest e-commerce company. It was the default. On November 11th, China holds its biggest shopping festival of the year, a day known as Singles' Day. In 2018, Alibaba processed roughly $30.8 billion in gross merchandise value in just 24 hours. At the center of it all was Jack Ma, the former English teacher who had become one of China's most recognizable business figures. Alibaba had the brands, the merchants, the traffic, the infrastructure. For anyone trying to challenge it, the obvious strategy was to build a better version of Alibaba. But that was exactly the problem. Beating Alibaba at being Alibaba wasn't realistic. So the real question was, what if you didn't play its game at all? Then came Colin Huang. He had worked as a software engineer at Google before building two companies of his own. One sold consumer electronics online. The other made mobile games. Neither made him a household name. Then, in 2015, Huang started a company called Pinduoduo. At the time, few people saw him as a threat to Alibaba. He had experience in e-commerce, but not at Alibaba's scale. He wasn't trying to become another Jack Ma. On paper, there was little reason to think he could take on China's dominant e-commerce company. But that blank space was exactly what gave him room to think differently. Huang wasn't asking, how do we build a better Taobao, Alibaba's flagship marketplace? He was asking a more dangerous question. What if shopping itself could become a way to acquire more shoppers? Huang took a fundamentally different approach. He didn't try to build a better Taobao. Alibaba's model was increasingly moving toward brands, merchants, and storefronts. You usually knew what you wanted. You searched for it. You compared the options. Then, you bought. Huang saw another kind of customer. People who didn't necessarily wake up knowing what they wanted to buy. People who could be pulled into shopping by a deal. Alibaba already knew this enormous market existed. It had committed more than $1 billion trying to reach rural consumers, village by village. Huang found a different way in. Use WeChat as the doorway to shopping, then make the price fall when more people joined. The idea was simple. Instead of asking, how do we get more people to come to the platform? Pinduoduo could ask, how do we give every shopper a reason to bring someone else? Alibaba was building a marketplace. Huang was building a growth loop. Here's what that looked like for an ordinary shopper. Imagine a woman in a small town who wants a bag of oranges. She could buy them immediately at a reasonable price. But then she sees another option. Join a group purchase. Invite a few friends, and the price drops. So she sends the link to a group chat. 3 friends tap join. The price falls. The order goes through. To her, it doesn't feel like advertising. She's just getting a better deal. But something else has happened. The product has now appeared in front of 3 new potential customers. No billboard, no television campaign, no salesperson. One shopper was simply trying to save money. And in the process, she became part of the company's distribution network. That was the breakthrough. Pinduoduo had turned a discount into distribution. And distribution was exactly what every e-commerce company was paying to build. What happened next moved fast. Fast enough that much of the industry was still debating whether Pinduoduo was a fad, while the numbers were already telling a different story. Instead of paying to bring shoppers to the platform, Pinduoduo gave shoppers a reason to bring other shoppers with them. The customer wasn't just the customer. The customer could also become the acquisition channel. Within roughly 2 years, Pinduoduo's annual merchandise volume had passed the $15 billion mark. It took Taobao about 5 years and JD.com, another major Chinese e-commerce company, about 10 to reach that same milestone. In 2018, Pinduoduo went public on the Nasdaq. Colin Huang, the quiet engineer few people had been watching, became one of China's youngest self-made billionaires. Suddenly, the company dismissed as an outsider was impossible to ignore. But the strangest part of the story was still ahead. Because, just as Pinduoduo was becoming one of China's biggest technology companies, Huang started walking away from it. And then, at 40 years old, Colin Huang stepped down as CEO. He wasn't fired. He hadn't been forced out by a scandal. He simply left the job. In 2020, Pinduoduo reported more annual active buyers than Alibaba's China retail marketplaces for the first time, a milestone that showed just how quickly the challenger had grown. Then, a year later, Huang gave up the chairmanship too. He was voluntarily surrendering control of a company whose market value was approaching $200 billion. Huang said he wanted to focus on research, including food science and agriculture. But that may not have been the whole story. There may have been several factors: a genuine interest in science, a desire to step away from public life, and a Chinese technology industry entering a period of much heavier regulatory pressure on its biggest founders. Huang never reduced the decision to one simple explanation, and outsiders can't know exactly which factor mattered most. What we do know is this: he had built a company that could outlive his presence. And, while Huang was stepping away, the company was already looking for its next market. For a while, it looked like the story of Colin Huang might end there. Huang disappeared from the spotlight. His playbook didn't. In 2022, PDD Holdings carried the playbook across the Pacific and called it Temu. The product was familiar: extreme prices, gamified discovery, a huge catalog, and an obsession with acquiring customers at a rate that seemed almost irrational. But Temu didn't simply copy Pinduoduo. In China, Pinduoduo's growth engine relied heavily on social sharing and group buying. In America, Temu leaned much more heavily on paid customer acquisition, spending aggressively across platforms such as Meta and Google, while also buying television advertising. The mechanism had changed. The philosophy hadn't. Get customers. Get them cheaply. Get them quickly. And get so many of them that scale itself becomes an advantage. Within months, Temu became one of the most downloaded shopping apps in the United States. Less than 6 months after launching in America, it was already buying Super Bowl advertising. And then came the slogan that would define Temu in America: "Shop like a billionaire." Suddenly, the company behind one of China's fastest-growing e-commerce platforms was playing on Amazon and Walmart's home turf, and Colin Huang didn't even have to come back. On November 30th, 2023, something happened that would have sounded absurd a decade earlier. PDD Holdings, the parent company behind both Pinduoduo and Temu, briefly overtook Alibaba in market value during intraday trading. For a moment, the challenger was worth more. The irony was hard to miss. Huang had challenged Alibaba without becoming another Jack Ma. He built a different kind of company, one designed to grow through the behavior of its own customers. You know Temu, you know Pinduoduo, you know Alibaba. But the most interesting part of Colin Huang's story isn't that he challenged Alibaba. It's that he walked away before most of the world even knew his name. The founder disappeared. The system kept growing.